The morning sun was shining through the big windows of the television studio in Chicago. Steve Harvey was sitting in his comfortable chair, drinking his usual cup of black coffee. He was getting ready for another day of filming his popular talk show. Steve loved meeting new people and hearing their stories. But today felt different somehow. Steve looked at his watch. It was 8:30 in the morning. His show would start filming in 2 hours. He always came to work early to prepare himself. Steve liked to read about his guests before meeting them. This helped him ask better questions and make people feel comfortable. His assistant knocked on the dressing room door. "Come in," Steve called out. The young woman walked in carrying a stack of papers. These were notes about today's guests. Steve smiled at her and said, "Good morning, Sarah. What do we have today?" Sarah looked nervous. She was holding the papers tightly in her hands. "Well, Mr. Harvey, we have something very unusual today," she said quietly. Steve raised his eyebrows. In all his years of hosting television shows, he had seen many strange things. What could be so unusual? "Tell me about it," Steve said, putting down his coffee cup. He could see that Sarah was worried about something. She sat down in the chair across from him. "A man called yesterday evening," Sarah began. "He said he was a royal guard from England. You know, one of those soldiers who stand outside the palace and wear the red uniforms." Steve nodded. He had seen pictures of those guards when he visited London a few years ago. They were famous for standing very still and never talking to anyone. Tourists always tried to make them laugh or move, but they never did. What did he want? Steve asked. This was getting interesting. Sarah looked at her notes. "His name is William Thompson. He has been a royal guard for 15 years. He said he needed to talk to you on television. He said it was very important." Steve thought about this. Why would a royal guard want to be on his show? These men were trained to stay quiet and never speak in public. They were like living statues. Something big must have happened to make one of them want to talk. Did he say what he wanted to talk about? Steve asked. Sarah shook her head. No, he just said it was personal. He sounded very sad on the phone. Our producer talked to him for an hour. The man even sent us his official papers to prove he was really a royal guard. Steve felt curious now. In his many years of television, he had learned to trust his feelings. Something told him this was going to be special. "Is he here already?" "Yes," Sarah said. "He arrived very early this morning. He flew all the way from London just for this. He is sitting in the green room right now. He has been very quiet. He just sits there looking at an old photograph." Steve stood up from his chair. He wanted to meet this mysterious guest. "Let's go see him," he said. They walked down the long hallway of the television studio. Steve could hear the sounds of people getting ready for the show. Cameramen were testing their equipment. The makeup artists were preparing their tools. Everyone was busy, but Steve's mind was focused on this unusual guest. When they reached the green room, Steve looked through the small window in the door. He saw a tall man in his red Royal Guard uniform. The man was sitting very straight, just like a soldier should. But something about him looked sad. He was holding a small piece of paper and staring at it very carefully. Steve took a deep breath. He had a feeling that today's show was going to be very different from any other show he had ever done. William Thompson sat in the green room with his back straight as a board. His red uniform was perfect. Every button was shiny. His black boots looked like mirrors. For 15 long years, this had been his life. Standing still, staying quiet, never showing any feelings on his face. William remembered his first day as a royal guard. He was only 22 years old then. He felt so proud to wear the famous red uniform. His mother had cried happy tears when she saw him. His little brother Marcus had been so excited. Marcus was only 15 then, just a kid who thought his big brother was a real-life superhero. The training had been very hard. The officers taught William how to stand for hours without moving. They taught him how to ignore people who tried to make him laugh. Tourists would make funny faces at him. Children would wave and call his name. Sometimes people would even touch him or try to take selfies, but William learned to be like a statue. No matter what happened, he never moved. He never smiled. He never spoke. Standing outside Buckingham Palace was not easy. In the summer, the sun was very hot. The heavy uniform made William sweat, but he could not wipe his face. In the winter, the cold wind cut through his clothes like knives. His feet would hurt so much that he wanted to cry, but he never showed it. A royal guard must be strong. A royal guard must be perfect. William had seen thousands of people walk by over the years, happy families taking pictures, couples holding hands, children running around and laughing. Sometimes he felt jealous watching them. They could talk. They could laugh. They could hug each other. William had to stand there like a robot, pretending he did not have feelings. The hardest part was the loneliness. Even when hundreds of people were around him, William felt alone. He could not talk to anyone while he was working. He could not make friends with the other guards while they were on duty. They all had to stay silent and serious. After work, William was too tired to go out and meet people. He would go home to his small apartment and watch television alone. But William had found something that made him feel better. Late at night, when he could not sleep, he would watch American television shows on his computer. His favorite was Steve Harvey's talk show. Steve was funny and kind. He helped people with their problems. He made families happy again. When Steve laughed, William felt like laughing too, even though he was alone in his room. Steve reminded William of his father. His dad had died when William was only 12 years old. His father had been a happy man who always helped his neighbors. He had the same warm smile as Steve Harvey. Watching Steve's show made William feel like his father was still with him somehow. Over the years, William kept watching Steve's show every night. When Steve helped a family, William felt proud. When Steve made people laugh, William smiled alone in his room. When Steve cried with his guests, William felt tears in his own eyes. Steve became like a friend to William, even though they had never met. But lately, something had changed in William's heart. The pain inside him was getting stronger every day. Standing still and staying quiet was becoming harder and harder. William had been keeping secrets for too long. He had been hiding his true feelings for 15 years. The weight of all those hidden emotions was crushing him. William looked down at the old photograph in his hands. It showed two young boys smiling at the camera. One was William at 12 years old. The other was his little brother Marcus at 5. They looked so happy together. But now, everything had changed. And William knew he could not stay silent anymore. The bright studio lights turned on with a loud click. The audience was filling up the seats, talking and laughing with each other. Some people were taking pictures with their phones. Others were waving at the cameras. Everyone seemed excited to be there, but none of them knew they were about to see something very special. Steve Harvey walked out from behind the stage. The crowd cheered and clapped loudly. Steve smiled his big warm smile and waved at everyone. He was wearing his best suit, a dark blue one with a bright red tie. Steve always dressed nicely for his show. He wanted to look good for his guests and his audience. "Good morning, everybody," Steve called out in his deep, friendly voice. The audience cheered even louder. Steve loved this part of his job. Making people happy always made him feel good inside. "We have a very special guest today," Steve said, walking closer to the audience. "Someone who has traveled a very long way to be here with us, all the way from London, England." The audience made excited sounds. They were curious about who this mystery guest could be. Steve looked toward the side of the stage where William was waiting. Even from far away, Steve could see that the man looked nervous. Steve walked back to his desk and sat down in his comfortable chair. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Royal Guard William Thompson." The audience clapped politely as William walked onto the stage. He moved like a soldier, very straight and careful with each step. His red uniform looked perfect under the bright lights. Some people in the audience whispered to each other. They had never seen a real royal guard before. William sat down in the guest chair across from Steve. Even sitting down, he kept his back perfectly straight. His hands were resting on his knees, but Steve noticed they were shaking just a little bit. William's face looked serious, almost sad. "Welcome to the show, William," Steve said with his warmest smile. He wanted to make his guest feel comfortable. "Thank you for coming all this way to see us." "Thank you for having me, Mr. Harvey," William said quietly. His English accent sounded very proper and polite, but his voice was tight, like he was trying hard not to show his feelings. Steve leaned forward in his chair. "Now, for folks who don't know, can you tell us what a royal guard does?" William cleared his throat. "We protect the royal family and their palaces," he said. "We stand guard outside Buckingham Palace and other important places. We must stay very still and very quiet while we work." "That sounds like a tough job," Steve said. "How long have you been doing this?" 15 years, William answered. His voice was getting softer. The audience was very quiet now. They could sense that something important was happening. Steve had been doing television for many years. He knew when someone had something big to say. William was not just here to talk about his job. "William," Steve said gently, "what made you want to come on our show today? You could have gone on any television program in the world. Why did you choose to come here to Chicago?" William looked down at his hands. They were shaking more now. He took a deep breath, like he was getting ready to jump into deep water. "Mr. Harvey," William said, his voice starting to crack, "I have been watching your show for many years. You remind me of someone very important to me. Someone I lost a long time ago." The studio became completely silent. Even the cameramen stopped moving. Everyone could feel that something emotional was about to happen. Steve felt his heart starting to beat faster. He leaned closer to William. "Tell me about it," Steve said softly. William took another deep breath. His hands were still shaking, but he knew he had to keep talking. The words had been stuck inside him for so long. Now they wanted to come out like water from a broken dam. "My father died when I was 12 years old," William said slowly. His voice was very quiet, so the audience had to lean forward to hear him. "He was the best man I ever knew. He was kind to everyone. He always helped our neighbors when they had problems. He had this big warm laugh that made everyone feel better." Steve felt something tug at his heart. He could see the pain in William's eyes. As a father himself, Steve knew how hard it must be to lose a parent so young. "I'm sorry for your loss," Steve said gently. "That must have been very hard for you." William nodded. "It was the worst day of my life. My little brother Marcus was only 5 then. He did not understand why Daddy was not coming home anymore. I had to be strong for him. I had to be the man of the house." The audience was completely silent now. Some people were already getting tears in their eyes. They could feel William's pain just by listening to his voice. "After my father died, I felt very alone," William continued. "My mother worked 2 jobs to take care of us. She was always tired. Marcus was just a little boy who needed his big brother to play with him. But I felt lost. I missed my father so much." William paused and looked directly at Steve. "Then, many years later, I found your show. I was living alone in London, working as a royal guard. Every night after work, I would go home and feel so lonely. But then I started watching you on my computer." Steve felt his throat getting tight. He had no idea that his show meant so much to someone so far away. "You reminded me of my father," William said, and now his voice was shaking with emotion. "You have the same kind heart, the same way of making people feel better, the same warm laugh that my dad had. When I watched you help families on your show, it was like my father was helping them too." A few people in the audience started crying quietly. Steve felt his own eyes getting wet. This was not what he had expected when he woke up this morning. "For 15 years, I stood outside that palace every day," William said. "I could not talk to anyone. I could not show my feelings. I had to be like a stone statue. But at night, when I watched your show, I felt human again. You made me laugh when I wanted to cry. You gave me hope when I felt hopeless." William's voice was getting stronger now, like talking about this was giving him courage. "I know this sounds crazy, Mr. Harvey. You don't even know me, but you became like a father to me. When you helped people on TV, you were helping me too. When you made them smile, you made me smile too." Steve had to wipe his eyes with his handkerchief. The audience was completely quiet except for the sound of people softly crying. Even the cameramen had tears in their eyes. "But something happened 3 months ago," William said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Something that changed everything. Something that made me realize I could not stay quiet anymore." The audience held their breath. Steve leaned forward, knowing that William was about to tell them the real reason he had come all this way. "What happened, William?" Steve asked softly. William's face went very pale. He looked down at his hands for a long moment. The whole studio was so quiet that everyone could hear the air conditioning making soft sounds. Steve waited patiently. He knew that whatever William was about to say would be very hard for him. 3 months ago, William began, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "I got a phone call in the middle of the night. It was from the hospital back home." William stopped talking and closed his eyes tight. Steve could see that this was the hardest part of his story. The audience was holding their breath, waiting to hear what had happened. "It was about my brother Marcus," William continued. "He had been in a terrible car accident. A drunk driver hit his car when he was driving home from work. Marcus was only 32 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him." Several people in the audience gasped. Steve felt his heart sink. He already knew this story was not going to have a happy ending. "The doctors tried everything they could," William said, tears starting to fall down his cheeks. "But Marcus was hurt too badly. He died 2 hours after I got the phone call. My little brother, the only family I had left, was gone." Now many people in the audience were crying openly. Steve had to wipe his own eyes again. He thought about his own children and how terrible it would be to lose one of them. "Marcus had a wife named Sarah and 2 beautiful children," William went on. "Emma is 7 years old, and little James is only 5. They are the same age Marcus and I were when our father died. Now they have to grow up without their daddy, just like we did." William's voice was shaking so much that he could barely speak, but he kept going. "Sarah called me crying. She said the children kept asking when Uncle William was coming home to help them. They did not understand why I was not there." Steve leaned forward. "Where were you when this happened?" "I was working," William said, his voice full of anger and sadness. "There was a big royal event that week. All the guards had to work extra hours. I asked my captain if I could go home for the funeral. I begged him. I told him it was my only brother." William's hands made fists on his knees. "But he said no. He said the royal event was more important than my personal problems. He said a good soldier puts his duty first, always. So I had to stay and stand guard while my brother was being buried." The audience was completely silent except for the sound of crying. Some people were shaking their heads in disbelief. How could anyone be so cruel? "I missed my brother's funeral," William said, the words coming out like they were burning his throat. "I was not there to help carry his coffin. I was not there to comfort his wife and children. I was not there to say goodbye to the person I loved most in the world." Steve felt angry too. "That's not right, William. Family should come first." "I know that now," William said. "But I was trained to follow orders. I was taught that my duty as a royal guard was more important than anything else. So I stood there in my red uniform, protecting people I did not even know, while my family needed me most." William looked up at Steve with eyes full of pain. "And that was just the beginning of my nightmare." William reached inside his red uniform jacket with shaking fingers. He pulled out a small folded piece of paper that looked old and worn. The paper had been folded and unfolded so many times that it was starting to tear at the edges. He held it against his chest, like it was the most precious thing in the world. After the funeral, I tried to be strong, William said, his voice breaking. I kept doing my job. I stood guard every day. I told myself that Marcus would want me to keep going. But inside, I was dying a little bit more each day. Steve watched as William's military posture began to crumble. The straight back was bending. The perfect soldier was becoming just a man in pain. Sarah, Marcus's wife, she tried to take care of the children by herself. William continued. But it was so hard for her. She had to work and be both mother and father. The children were crying every night, asking for their daddy. And they kept asking for me too. William unfolded the piece of paper very carefully, like it might break if he was not gentle enough. I applied for leave many times. I wrote letters to my captain explaining that my family needed me. I begged them to let me go home for just 1 week to help Sarah with the children. His voice got angry now. But every time, they said no. They said I was being selfish. They said a royal guard cannot abandon his post for personal reasons. They said there were other guards who had never even asked for time off, so why should I be special? The audience was getting angry too. People were shaking their heads and making upset sounds. Steve felt his own anger growing. How could anyone be so heartless? Then, 2 weeks ago, something happened that broke my heart completely, William said. He looked down at the paper in his hands. I got a letter in the mail. It was from Emma, Marcus's 7-year-old daughter. William's hands were shaking so much that he could barely hold the paper steady. She had written me a letter at school. Her teacher helped her with some of the words, but most of it was in her own little handwriting. Steve leaned closer. He could see that the paper was covered in colorful crayon marks and a child's messy writing. What did the letter say? Steve asked gently. William tried to read from the paper, but his voice kept breaking. She wrote, "Dear Uncle William, why didn't you come to Daddy's goodbye party? Mommy said you were too busy with work, but I thought you loved Daddy like I did." Several people in the audience started crying louder. Steve felt his throat getting tight with emotion. William continued reading through his tears. I drew you a picture of me and you and Daddy together. We are all holding hands and smiling. I miss Daddy so much. I miss you too. When are you coming home to help us? Love, Emma. William held up the paper so everyone could see it. It was a child's drawing made with crayons. 3 stick figures were holding hands under a rainbow. One was labeled Daddy, one was Uncle William, and one was Emma. There were tears drawn on all their faces, but they were still smiling. I have carried this letter with me every single day since I got it, William said. I keep it right here, over my heart. Every time I stand guard, I feel it against my chest. This little girl thinks I don't love her father. She thinks work is more important to me than family. William looked directly into the camera. But she's wrong. Nothing is more important than family. Nothing. Steve Harvey had been on television for many years. He had seen people cry on his show before. He had helped families through hard times. He had heard sad stories that made him emotional. But nothing had ever hit him like this moment. Looking at that little girl's drawing, Steve felt like someone had punched him right in the chest. The drawing was so simple, but it said everything. 3 stick figures holding hands. A little girl who just wanted her family to be together. A child who could not understand why the grown-ups in her life were not there when she needed them most. Steve thought about his own children and grandchildren. He imagined how they would feel if something happened to him and their uncle was too busy to come see them. Can I see that? Steve asked quietly, reaching out his hand. William carefully gave him the drawing. Steve held it like it was made of glass. He studied every crayon mark, every crooked line, every misspelled word. The rainbow was colored outside the lines. The stick figures had big round heads and tiny bodies. It looked exactly like something a 7-year-old would make for someone she loved. Steve felt tears starting to fall down his face. He did not try to stop them. The whole studio was watching him, but he did not care. This was not about television anymore. This was about something much more important. "William," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "this little girl loves you so much. Look at this picture. She drew you right there next to her daddy. You are part of her family. You are important to her." William was crying too now. For 15 years, he had trained himself not to show feelings. Royal Guards were supposed to be strong and emotionless. But sitting here with Steve, holding his niece's drawing, all those walls came tumbling down. "I know," William whispered. "That's why I cannot do this anymore. I cannot keep pretending that my job is more important than the people I love. I cannot keep standing there like a statue while my family falls apart." Steve looked out at the audience. Every single person was crying. Men, women, young people, old people. Everyone was feeling the same pain. The cameramen had tears in their eyes. Even the tough security guards were wiping their faces. "You know what this reminds me of?" Steve said, looking back at the drawing. "This reminds me of when I was young, and my daddy had to work all the time. He missed a lot of my baseball games because he was trying to make money for our family. I used to draw pictures like this too, wishing he could be there with me." Steve set the drawing down carefully on his desk where everyone could see it. "But the difference is, my daddy was working to feed his family. You are being kept away from your family for no good reason. There is no reason in the world why you should not be allowed to go home and help raise these children." The audience started clapping. It was not the usual happy clapping that happened on TV shows. This was different. This was people showing that they agreed with Steve. This was people saying that William was right to speak up. "William," Steve said, standing up from his chair, "I want you to know something. Your brother would be proud of you right now. He would be proud that you are fighting for his children. He would be proud that you chose love over duty." William looked up at Steve with hope in his eyes for the first time since he had started talking. Steve walked around his desk and sat down in the chair right next to William. This was not something he usually did on his show, but this was not a usual day. Steve wanted to be close to this man who had traveled so far to share his pain. "William," Steve said, putting his hand on William's shoulder, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you did today took more courage than standing guard at any palace. Speaking your truth, showing your feelings, asking for help. That is real bravery." William looked at Steve with tears still flowing down his face. For so many years, he had thought that being strong meant hiding his feelings. He had thought that being a good soldier meant putting duty before everything else. But sitting here with Steve, he was starting to understand that maybe he had been wrong about what strength really meant. "You know what I learned in my life," Steve continued, his voice warm and gentle. "The strongest people are not the ones who never cry. The strongest people are the ones who cry when they need to, and then they do something about their problems. That is exactly what you are doing right now." The audience was listening to every word. Many people were nodding their heads, agreeing with what Steve was saying. Some people were thinking about their own families and their own difficult choices between work and love. "I want to tell you a story," Steve said, leaning back in his chair. "When I was starting my career in comedy, I thought success meant working all the time. I missed my children's birthday parties. I missed school plays. I missed bedtime stories. I thought I was being a good father by working hard to make money for them." William was listening carefully. Steve's story sounded familiar to him. "But one day, my little girl drew me a picture, just like Emma drew for you," Steve continued. "In her picture, there was our family at the dinner table, but my chair was empty. She had drawn everyone else, but not me. When I asked her why, she said, 'Daddy, you are never home for dinner, so I forgot to put you there.'" Steve's voice got quiet. "That was the day I realized that my children did not need my money as much as they needed me. They needed their father to be present, not just to pay the bills. That little picture changed my whole life." William wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "What did you do?" "I changed my priorities," Steve said firmly. I started saying no to some work so I could say yes to my family. I learned that being successful at work does not mean anything if you fail at being a father, a brother, a son. Steve looked directly into the camera, speaking to everyone watching at home. Life is short, people. We all learned that from this pandemic. We all learned that the most important thing is not how much money we make or how important our jobs are. The most important thing is love. The most important thing is being there for the people who need us. The audience started clapping again. This time, it was louder and stronger. People were standing up from their seats. They were not just clapping for William anymore. They were clapping for the message Steve was sharing. They were clapping for the idea that family should come first. "William," Steve said, turning back to his guest, "I promise you something right here, right now, in front of all these people. We are going to figure out how to get you home to your family. We are going to make sure Emma and James know that their Uncle William loves them more than any job in the world." William sat quietly for a moment, thinking about everything Steve had said. The studio was completely silent. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. William looked down at Emma's drawing one more time. The three stick figures holding hands seemed to be looking back at him, waiting for him to make a choice. Slowly, William stood up from his chair. His red uniform still looked perfect, but something about him had changed. He was no longer the statue-like soldier who had walked onto the stage. He was just a man who had found his courage. "Mr. Harvey," William said, his voice stronger than it had been all day, "you have given me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. You have shown me that it is okay to choose love over duty. You have shown me that my family needs me more than the palace does." Steve stood up too, sensing that something important was about to happen. The audience leaned forward in their seats. William turned to face the camera directly. For 15 years, he had been trained never to speak in public. He had been taught that royal guards should be seen but not heard. But now he had something to say that the whole world needed to hear. "I came here today feeling lost and broken," William said to the camera. "I thought I was trapped forever in a job that was keeping me away from the people I love most. But sitting here with Steve Harvey, I have realized something very important." William took a deep breath. "I am not trapped. I have a choice, and today I am making that choice." The audience held their breath. Steve felt his heart beating fast. "I am resigning from my position as a royal guard," William announced. His voice was clear and strong. "I am going home to London to help my sister-in-law, Sarah, raise Marcus's children. Emma and James need their Uncle William more than the palace needs another guard standing at the gate." The audience exploded in cheers and applause. People were jumping up from their seats, clapping and shouting with joy. Some people were crying happy tears. The noise was so loud that it felt like the roof might come off the building. Steve felt tears of joy running down his face. He opened his arms wide, and William walked into them. The two men hugged each other tightly, both crying openly now. It was not a professional television hug. It was a real hug between two people who understood each other's pain. "I am so proud of you," Steve whispered in William's ear. "Your brother is proud of you too. You are doing the right thing." When they finally let go of each other, Steve turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what real courage looks like. This is what real strength looks like. William Thompson just chose love over everything else, and that makes him a hero in my book." The audience kept clapping for several more minutes. Some people were wiping their eyes. Others were calling out words of support to William. The energy in the room was electric with emotion and hope. Later that day, after the show was over, Steve's team helped William in many ways. They connected him with job agencies in London that could help him find work near his family. They raised money from viewers to help Sarah pay for the children's school and other needs. They even helped William buy a plane ticket home so he could surprise Emma and James. The episode became one of the most watched shows in television history. People from all over the world sent messages of support to William. His story inspired thousands of people to make their own brave choices about family and love. But most importantly, Emma and James got their Uncle William back, just like Emma had drawn in her picture.